Hi, welcome to Module Unit 1, Lecture 1, Part 2. Unit 1, remember the title is Preparing Educators for Differentiated Instruction, and this module should go from July 8th to July 13th. The purpose of this lecture is to review the fundamentals of differentiated instruction past its definition. We'll go a little bit deeper. We've surveyed some aspects of differentiated instruction in previous courses, but this course will highlight structural, instructional, and environmental aspects that must be present in order for differentiated instruction to be most effective. I've added to each of the lectures a lecture sequence of readings covered in each of the slides so that you can follow along with your readings or go back to them. So it depends on how you review the content, even though I know it's listed with the lecture coming after the readings. If you decide to go back and want to review, these are the slides that cover which pages. And just remember that these pages highlight the essentials of the chapters. However, it is imperative that you take time to read all the chapters to score your best on the reading quizzes, because I intentionally go through every single page and then pick out the most critical parts of the readings that you may have missed to make sure that we're all getting the meat of the content. Next, Unit 1, text. We have only 2 readings for this week. The reading 1 is the article that I believe was written prior to the book, and it's by the same author. And then reading 2, we go through chapters 1 through 31. So again, some of this is review, some of it is not. Chapters 1 through 3 covers, or pages 1 through 3, 31 covers chapters 1 through 5. Sorry. I've also provided a plethora of additional resources because one of the things I learned that really changed my way of teaching was my understanding of the adolescent brain, which is critical for me as a secondary educator. But for you, you might need the children's viewpoint or standpoint in regards to research and how the brain works. So I've added in both 2 resources for that, and then 2 articles supporting differentiated instruction practice that you can read at your own time, or just have them as resources in the future. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, the first article is here, and I have it uploaded in the module, and then you should also see this uploaded again, but you already have a copy of that. So to begin, Carol Ann Tomlinson starts the conversation off with hallmarks of differentiated classrooms, and I like the way she situates this because she's letting you know how the classroom should operate. So she starts off by 2 givens that teachers come in with who plan to differentiate. 2 things that they know that they have to work with, that they have to differentiate, is that there are standards that will serve as the destination points for the content that has to be taught, and then there are students who will inevitably vary as learners. And I know these are like, hello, we all know this. However, do we really know what that means in regards to how we differentiate? So one of the things that I think we often miss about differentiation is that it is intended to grow every single student. That's why understanding the destinations with the standards, meaning the goals academically, and then the differences between your students is critical in order for you to really differentiate your classroom practices. Because when they are differentiated, the outcome should be that every student is growing, not just students who you are modifying the instruction for to meet their challenges. Oftentimes, and we'll talk about this a little later in the chapter, advanced students do not get the accommodations they need. They don't get the modifications that they need through differentiated practices because we're not teaching up for their levels. So they stay stagnant or they stay static, and their skills do not grow. The purpose is that the student is in competition with themselves. They're supposed to be developing a healthy self-regulating system where they challenge themselves, they set academic goals, they have an academic identity that they're proud of, that they want to develop and continue to grow in subject areas. So it says here that they should always be moving toward and often beyond the designated content goals. So understanding the destination at the end can give you the opportunity as the educator to differentiate so that they can go beyond it. The idea is that there are various forms of challenge integrated into the different methods of teaching to ensure that all students develop beyond their academic goals. She also goes in to say that although we all know quite a bit about differentiated instruction, we often forget about assessments and what role they play in our differentiated approaches. The one thing that you have to keep in mind is that it is your responsibility, as if you apply differentiated instruction, I would say just best practices, to always have assessments routinely throughout what you're doing in regards to your classroom content to ensure that you are approaching the classroom in a way that students need and that is growing them. So assessment routinely takes place as a unit begins to determine the particular needs of individuals in relation to the unit goals, and then it continues. It's not just a starting, it's a 360. It's a circular process that doesn't end to the year ends. Perhaps a good way to begin an exploration of differentiated teaching is to look at the classroom through the eyes of two broad categories of students: those who struggle, those who are advanced, and those who struggle. So students who are advanced, we're going to start off with them because sometimes I think they're often forgotten. And the problem with that, obviously, is that that's a third of our class or a fourth of our class, or if you teach honors and there's levels of learning, that's a fifth of your class, right? So, or half of them, depending on the group that you're teaching. It is so important that we think about each of the levels of the students that we will be addressing. So advanced learners can be mentally lazy even though they do well in school. Maybe A's are easy for them. I was one of those students who could not be challenged, especially if I didn't see the point. And not that I considered myself as an advanced learner. However, I was able to finish high school in 3 years. But if you ask me what I took away from it, absolutely nothing. And that is because it did not relate to me, and it didn't really click to me the purpose of it. So I eased by in a lot of content areas with making the grade or a little bit under. So I'm going to caution you that just because they're making the grade, it doesn't mean that they're learning. Advanced learners may become perfectionists, meaning that they may develop some unhealthy habits in how they're learning. So you want to make sure that in the middle of them trying to be perfect, that they learn about the challenges of their learning and have opportunities to fail and succeed in their progress to developing growth in the content areas. Advanced learners may fail to develop a sense of self-efficacy, meaning that they may not be able to develop self-regulatory habits that would allow them to set goals and meet them. So it's up to you to kind of grow that in them as they are developing the skills for the standards that they're meeting in the course. And then advanced learners may fail to develop study and coping skills. Kind of relates to self-efficacy, meaning that because they don't get the challenge, they don't really put the effort forward, so they have a hard time coping and also studying to get the grade that they may desire. So with struggling learners, it's different, and I feel like I just have to say this. We don't have slow learners. We have students who are challenged by the content or the approaches that we use. So I'll say that again. We don't have slow learners. We have students who are struggling learners. We have students who are challenged by the content or the approaches that we use. And I say that on purpose because one of the things I learned about when I was studying students with special needs was to separate the adjective from defining the student, meaning that this student is or this student has autism, not this is an autistic kid. You know, that to me kind of, even though it's a personal preference and it's not wrong to say, but knowing in my head that the student is much more than what may define them or characteristics of things that they may be growing with is powerful for me, because when I design content, I always look at it from the perspective of this is a student who has a challenge with my content, so therefore I can change the content, I can change the way in which it's delivered, I can change the way in which it's organized for them to complete it. But what is not fixed is their ability to master this skill, because I have separated how I define or how I characterize them in regards to their ability from who they actually are. This is one piece of what they do. So remember the needs of students who are struggling. Look for the struggling learners' positives. Okay, don't let what's broken extinguish what works, which is it goes on that notion of, hey, look, they are a whole person or they're a growing whole person. School is just a small factor of what defines who they are. Use their strengths and their talents in order to grow the rest of what they may be challenged with. Pay attention to relevance. Go for powerful learning. Teach up and then use many avenues to learning, and then see with the eyes of love, meaning that see the classroom through the approach and perspectives that they can and they will. It's just a matter of how you reach them in order to help them find their best methods of learning. Your role in the classroom is very different in a differentiated instruction classroom. And that's something that I really love that she points out, that your role and responsibilities are very different. So when you have opportunity to read this, make sure you go over this chapter. I'll be going over this chapter for myself as I prepare for this next school year. But the teacher's role in a differentiated instruction classroom focuses on their role as coach or mentor, gives students as much responsibility for learning as they can handle, and teach them to handle a little bit more. So I know for those of you who are in primary settings, I used to teach preschool, they can only handle like little bits of self-regulation and developing their self-efficacy and within regards to learning. But the cool thing is that you just give them a little bit, and then you give them a little bit more, and then you give them a little bit more until they can handle much more. But the key is that you stay with their pace. So these teachers grow in their ability to assess student readiness through a variety of means, read and interpret student clues about interests and learning preferences. So you have to be an active listener. Create a variety of ways students can gather information and ideas, and then develop varied ways students can explore and own ideas. And then present varied channels through which students can express and expand understanding. So your role as an educator within a differentiated instruction classroom, which I love, to step back and kind of be a coach or be the facilitator of learning as opposed to the person who owns the learning experience. The learning environment in a differentiated classroom also should be different. And I'm going to say cautionary tale here. Be very mindful of how you see yourself in regards to the power dynamics in your classroom. So I've been challenged with some environments that I've been a part of where teachers did not have a respect for students. And I think that does matter in regards to how students are treated and how they feel. I don't, and this is not a judgment statement, I feel like sometimes students are not respected, and that oftentimes, yes, sometimes they're challenging, just like we are with our characteristics and personality traits. However, they still have a voice, and they still should have the option to be heard in their classrooms in a respectful way. So, within a differentiated classroom, a learning community is imperative. You have to build a learning community kind of like we started at the very first course, where you set the norms together, and you have levels of agreement to what will and what won't happen. So characteristics of an effective learning community for a differentiated instruction classroom includes mutual respect, which is non-negotiable. So you should be respecting them, and they too shall respect you. Students feel safe in the classroom. It's hard to feel safe if there's no mutual respect. There is a pervasive expectation of growth, and that means for every single person in that room, including yourself, growth is the key. The teacher teaches for success. A new sort of fairness is evident, meaning that it's not just one way, that there's ability for things to grow and change based on the circumstances, and you actually hearing out the situation. One of the things I typically do is have community classroom meetings on the Friday morning before the bell rings, or right after the bell rings, where the student leader in the classroom can actually run the meeting, and I can sit back and hear the grievances and understand where they're coming from. I also have a survey box that I create for students to be able to voice their concerns if they don't want to do it around other people in a non-intimidating way. I say all that to say that increases the level of fairness in my classroom. So I would encourage you to find ways in which you can incorporate elements of fairness. Even though you may think that you're being fair to students, they may not feel that way. So empowering them to have a voice and kind of express to you how they're feeling is important. And the last point is that teacher and students collaborate for mutual growth and success. Students have to be a part of the process in order for them to actually embrace it. From this unit, you should have been able to get the following points. Thoroughly break down the essentials of differentiated instruction, the purpose for utilizing this model in mixed ability classrooms like the ones we currently all teach in. And then 2, the additional readings to also align the use of differentiated instruction to the development stages of students to differentiate the need for adapting these teaching approaches to your current classroom settings. And then finally, part of this unit is the application. So at the conclusion of your reading, please go into the discussion where you'll be able to talk about the examples that Chapter 5 offers. This concludes this lecture. I hope that it provided you with a great overview of everything that was read and stated. I will say that there is a lot of content within a reading, so you may want to take some notes and keep them, because as typical with all the other courses I've taught, the first 2 weeks are the foundational weeks where you get all the I chunk the larger readings and the fundamental things that you need to know, and then I spread them out along modules 2 through 7. So this particular 4 weeks that we have before the start of the school year will be imperative that you remember the things that we started at the beginning so that you can apply them to the projects and to the assignments that we have. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week.